Right now, as you're watching this, pay attention to what's happening in your mind. Notice how thoughts just appear. You didn't order them up. You didn't consciously craft them. They simply materialized, fully formed, like uninvited guests walking into your mental space. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet discovered that brain activity begins 300 to 500 milliseconds before you're even aware of having a thought. Your consciousness isn't creating thoughts, it's receiving them after the fact. The ancient Egyptian god Thoth taught something remarkable about this. He said, consciousness works like a mirror. It reflects thoughts, but it doesn't generate them. You're not the author of your mental chatter. You're the awareness, observing it. Want proof? Try this. For the next 60 seconds, think absolutely nothing. Go ahead. I'll wait. Couldn't do it, right? That's because you're not in control of the thinking process. You're the witness to it. And once you truly grasp this distinction, reality itself starts responding to you in completely different ways. This changes everything about who you think you are. In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet changed everything we thought we knew about free will and conscious decision-making. His experiment was elegantly simple. Participants were asked to move their hand whenever they felt like it, while watching a special clock and noting the exact moment they became aware of their intention to move. Meanwhile, electrodes measured their brain activity. What Libet discovered should have been front-page news everywhere. The brain showed a clear spike of electrical activity, what he called the readiness potential, a full 350 milliseconds before people reported being aware of their decision to move. Think about that for a moment. Your brain was already preparing to act before you knew you wanted to act. But here's where it gets really interesting. When researchers refined these experiments using modern fMRI technology, they pushed that window even further. In some cases, they could predict with 60% accuracy what decision a person would make up to 10 seconds before the person reported being consciously aware of their choice. 10 seconds. That's an eternity in brain time. This isn't just about simple hand movements anymore. We're talking about complex decisions, preferences, even moral judgments. Your brain is constantly running calculations, weighing options, and arriving at conclusions that bubble up into your conscious awareness as your thoughts. Modern neuroscience has revealed something that sounds almost mystical. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine. It's not passively waiting for information to come in and then responding. Instead, it's constantly generating models of what it expects to happen next, based on every single experience you've ever had. These predictions become the thoughts that feel so intimately yours. Here's a concrete example of how this works. Imagine you're about to have a difficult conversation with your partner about money. As you approach them, your brain isn't responding to this present moment. It's instantly accessing neural networks formed by every previous difficult conversation you've ever had with this partner, with past partners, with your parents when you were 12 and broke something expensive. Your brain rapidly processes these patterns. The tone of voice that usually signals defensiveness, the body language that preceded past arguments, the outcomes of similar conversations. Within milliseconds, it generates predictions about how this conversation will unfold. These predictions surface as thoughts. They're going to get defensive. This never goes well. I should just avoid this topic. But here's the crucial part. These thoughts feel current and relevant, but they're actually historical replays. Your brain is broadcasting a frequency based on past data, not present reality. And here's where ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science converge in the most fascinating way. Thousands of years ago, the Egyptian god Thoth described the mind not as a generator of thoughts, but as a receiving station. According to these ancient teachings, consciousness is like a radio that tunes into different frequencies of information already existing in the field of possibility. Your brain, with its vast network of neural patterns formed by past experiences, determines which frequency you're most likely to receive. When you approach that difficult conversation already broadcasting the frequency of past conflicts, something remarkable happens. Other people's brains, which are also prediction machines, pick up on these subtle cues, your micro-expressions, your posture. Their unconscious processing systems recognize the pattern and begin generating their own predictions. This is going to be confrontational. I need to be defensive. Here we go again. This creates what psychologists call self-fulfilling prophecies, but the mechanism is far more sophisticated than we previously understood. You're not just thinking yourself into negative outcomes, you're unconsciously coordinating with other people's prediction systems to recreate familiar patterns. The person who walks into a job interview broadcasting the frequency of past rejections will unconsciously trigger the interviewer's pattern recognition systems associated with uncertainty and doubt. The person who approaches new relationships while their brain runs programs from past heartbreak will find themselves in familiar situations that confirm those neural patterns. This is where metacognitive awareness becomes revolutionary. Neuroscientists define metacognition as thinking about thinking, the ability to observe your mental processes from a position that's not entangled with them. It's like stepping outside the radio to observe which station it's tuned to, rather than being lost in the music. When you develop metacognitive awareness, something extraordinary happens in your brain. Neuroimaging studies show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, particularly in areas associated with cognitive control and self-monitoring. You're literally building new neural pathways that can observe and redirect your automatic thought patterns. Here's a practical exercise that can begin rewiring your relationship to thoughts immediately. For the next 7 days, spend 5 minutes each morning practicing what I call thought labeling. Simply sit quietly and observe whatever thoughts arise, but instead of engaging with their content, label them by category. Planning thought, when your mind starts organizing your day. Worry thought, when anxiety about future events surfaces. Memory thought, when past experiences replay. Judgment thought, when you're evaluating or criticizing something. Fantasy thought, when you're imagining scenarios that haven't happened. The key is to do this without judgment and without trying to stop or change the thoughts. You're not trying to control your thinking, you're developing the capacity to observe it from a different position. This simple practice creates what neuroscientists call cognitive diffusion, a gap between your awareness and your thinking that changes everything. Most people are so identified with their thoughts that they can't distinguish between their awareness and their mental activity. But when you consistently practice observing thoughts as temporary mental events rather than absolute truths, you begin to access what Thoth called the witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your mind without being controlled by it. This shift in perspective doesn't just change how you feel about your thoughts, it changes how reality responds to you. When you're no longer unconsciously broadcasting the frequency of past patterns, when you can observe your mental predictions without being trapped by them, you begin showing up in situations from a fundamentally different state of consciousness. The neuroscience is clear. This kind of metacognitive training literally rewires your brain. It strengthens neural networks associated with present moment awareness, while weakening the automatic activation of historical patterns. You become less predictable to other people's unconscious processing systems, which means you're no longer locked into recreating familiar dynamics. Tomorrow, we'll explore how these individual changes in consciousness create what Thoth called reality shifting, the phenomenon where changing your internal frequency begins attracting entirely different experiences and opportunities into your life. Picture yourself as an archaeologist, but instead of digging through ancient ruins, you're excavating your own mind. Every recurring thought that creates emotional turbulence in your life is like a pottery shard, buried in layers of time. And when you trace it back to its origin, something remarkable happens. The thought loses its grip on you. Thoth understood something that modern neuroscience is just beginning to confirm. Most of what we experience as thinking isn't fresh mental activity responding to present circumstances. It's automated replay systems running old programs, like scratched vinyl records stuck in the same groove, playing the same few bars over and over until you start believing that repetitive loop is the entire song. Your brain operates as a prediction machine, constantly scanning current situations and matching them against its vast database of past experiences. When it finds similarities, even superficial ones, it automatically fires the same neural networks that activated during those original events. The problem? Those networks carry the emotional charge, the beliefs, and the behavioral responses from situations that may have happened decades ago. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah, a successful marketing executive, noticed she felt physically nauseous every time her boss scheduled one-on-one meetings. The thought, "I'm going to get in trouble," would flood her mind, followed by an elaborate mental rehearsal of everything she might have done wrong. This happened regardless of her actual performance, which was consistently excellent. When Sarah began tracing this pattern backward, she discovered something fascinating. The nauseous feeling and the trouble thoughts weren't about her current job at all. They traced directly back to 3rd grade, when her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, would call students to her desk individually to discuss their behavior problems. Sarah remembered the exact moment. She was 8 years old, watching classmates return from those desk-side conversations in tears, and her nervous system encoded a simple equation: authority figure plus private meeting equals danger. For 30 years, every time Sarah encountered a similar pattern boss requesting private time, her brain would automatically activate those same neural pathways, complete with the 8-year-old's emotional response and survival strategies. The adult Sarah was experiencing genuine fear, but it wasn't fear of her current situation. It was an echo from 1993. This is what Thoth meant when he taught that most human suffering comes from living in the past disguised as the present. We think we're responding to what's happening now, but we're actually reacting to ghosts, neural imprints of old experiences that our prediction-obsessed brain keeps projecting onto new situations. Consider the thought, "I'm not good enough." If this pattern runs in your mental background, it didn't originate from your current circumstances. It typically traces back to specific moments of comparison or criticism during formative years. Maybe it was the day your older brother won the science fair while your project barely earned a participation ribbon. Maybe it was overhearing your parents worry about your grades compared to your cousins. The exact moment doesn't matter as much as recognizing that the thought isn't a current assessment, it's an ancient recording. The same applies to financial anxiety. The thought, "money is hard to make," rarely comes from adult analysis of economic conditions. More often it echoes from childhood observations, parents arguing about bills, the stress in your mother's voice when she said, "We can't afford that," the shame you felt wearing hand-me-down clothes to school. Your adult brain encounters financial decisions and automatically activates those old neural networks, complete with the emotional charge from when you were 7 years old and powerless. Here's where archaeology becomes liberation. I want you to try what I call the 14-day source tracking exercise. For the next 2 weeks, whenever you notice a repetitive thought pattern that creates emotional charge, anxiety, anger, sadness, fear, stop and ask yourself this question. When is the first time I remember thinking this exact thought or feeling this exact way? Don't force the answer. Don't dig frantically or analyze obsessively. Simply pose the question to your memory systems and let them respond naturally. Often, you'll be surprised by what surfaces. The thought that feels so relevant to your current situation will suddenly reveal its true origin, a moment from childhood or adolescence, when something happened that installed a belief, a fear, or a pattern of self-protection. Michael discovered his chronic worry about not having enough time traced back to age 12, when his father had a heart attack and he heard adults whispering that time was running out. Linda realized her fear of speaking up in meetings connected directly to being harshly criticized by her grandmother for talking back, age 6. James found his pattern of assuming people didn't like him originated from being excluded from a birthday party in 4th grade. The revolutionary recognition hits you like lightning. Your current thoughts aren't about current situations at all. They're echoes from the past. And here's the crucial part: echoes have no power except what we give them by believing they represent current reality. When you identify the true source of a recurring thought pattern, something immediate begins shifting. You stop identifying with the thought as your authentic response and start recognizing it as outdated programming. It's like realizing you've been trying to run modern software on an operating system from 1987. No wonder things weren't working smoothly. This doesn't mean dismissing or suppressing these thoughts. Instead, you develop what researchers call cognitive diffusion, the ability to observe thoughts without being controlled by them. When the "I'm not good enough" pattern activates, instead of believing it and gathering evidence to support it, you might notice, "Oh, there's that 8-year-old's voice again, still trying to protect me from criticism." Thoth taught that awareness of the source is the beginning of freedom from its influence. Once you see that a thought pattern originated in a specific past context, it loses its authority over your present moment. You realize you're not a victim of your thoughts, you're an archaeologist who's uncovered their origin story. The most profound shift happens when you recognize that the person who installed these patterns, your younger self, was doing the best they could with limited information and emotional resources. Those thoughts were adaptive responses to real situations. The 8-year-old who decided, "I'm not good enough," was trying to avoid further criticism. The 12-year-old who learned, "Time is running out," was processing overwhelming fear about loss. Start your archaeological dig today. When you catch your mind running familiar worry loops or self-criticism patterns, pause and ask, where did this thought originally come from? Your memory systems hold the answers, and those answers hold the keys to your freedom. You know how we discovered in the last section that your recurring thoughts are basically ancient software programs running on autopilot? Well, here's where things get really fascinating, and where modern science starts catching up to what Thoth understood thousands of years ago. Your body is literally broadcasting the frequency of whatever you're identified with. And reality? It's listening. The HeartMath Institute has been studying this for decades, and their research reveals something extraordinary. Your heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends 8 to 10 feet in all directions around your body. This isn't some mystical concept. You can measure it with scientific instruments. This field carries information about your internal state, and here's the kicker. Other people's nervous systems are unconsciously reading this information constantly. Think about it. You've walked into a room and immediately felt someone's anxiety, even before they said a word. You've met people who just felt off somehow. Or, conversely, others who radiated a calm presence that made you feel better just being near them. That's not intuition. That's your nervous system detecting their electromagnetic broadcast. But here's where it gets really interesting. Thoth taught that consciousness operates through vibrational fields that interact with the fabric of reality itself, what the ancients called the responsive field of existence. Modern quantum physicists are starting to describe something remarkably similar, a field of information where observer and observed are intimately connected. Now, remember those thought patterns we traced back to their origins? When you identify with them, when you believe that anxious thought is you, or that limiting belief defines you, your electromagnetic field broadcasts the frequency of those thoughts into this responsive field. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah, a brilliant architect I know, had this recurring thought pattern. I'm not creative enough for the really innovative projects. Every time a challenging design opportunity came up, this thought would surface, and she'd identify with it completely. Her electromagnetic field would broadcast limitation, inadequacy, creative blockage. And reality responded perfectly to that broadcast. She kept getting assigned to routine, uninspiring projects. The wild part? Sarah was doing manifestation work every morning. Vision boards, affirmations, visualizations of herself designing groundbreaking buildings. But she was trying to broadcast a new frequency through conscious intention, while her unconscious identification with that limiting thought pattern transmitted a much stronger, contradictory signal all day long. This explains why so many people get frustrated with manifestation techniques. They're attempting to override a powerful unconscious broadcast with a few minutes of conscious effort. It's like trying to change a radio station by thinking really hard about different music while the actual dial remains locked on static. The difference between thought-based frequencies and awareness-based frequencies is like the difference between a radio constantly scanning between stations and a clear, strong signal from a single powerful transmitter. When you're identified with thoughts, your electromagnetic field is chaotic, constantly shifting based on whatever thought arises next. Anxiety thought, anxiety broadcast. Confidence thought, confidence broadcast. Self-doubt thought, self-doubt broadcast. Reality tries to respond to this constantly changing signal, but it's like getting contradictory instructions every few minutes. Awareness-based frequencies are completely different. They're coherent, stable, powerful. Think of someone you know who has real presence, not just charisma, but that quality where they seem unshakable regardless of what's happening around them. They've learned to identify with awareness itself rather than the content of thoughts. This is where the awareness anchor practice becomes crucial, twice daily. And I mean this literally. Put it in your calendar. Sit quietly for 10 minutes and practice shifting your attention from thoughts themselves to the awareness observing them. Here's how. Close your eyes and notice whatever thoughts are arising. Don't try to stop them or change them. Instead, notice that you're aware of them. There's the thought, I should be doing something productive right now. And there's the awareness that notices this thought. Focus on that awareness. Notice that this awareness doesn't have a specific location. It's not behind your eyes or in your head. It's more like a spacious presence that thoughts appear within, like clouds appearing in an open sky. The clouds come and go, but the sky remains unchanged. Train your nervous system to identify with that sky-like awareness, rather than the passing clouds of thought content. This isn't meditation in the traditional sense. It's identity training. You're literally rewiring your sense of self. But here's the crucial element most people miss. You have to maintain this awareness momentum throughout the day. This is where the real transformation happens. When you're talking to someone, notice that you're aware of the conversation. Don't just get lost in the content. Maintain contact with the awareness that's observing the interaction. When you're eating, notice that you're aware of eating. When you're walking, notice that you're aware of walking. This creates a coherent electromagnetic broadcast from awareness rather than chaotic broadcast from thought identification. And reality responds in ways that seem almost magical. Synchronicities start appearing. Opportunities emerge from unexpected directions. Conversations take surprising turns that lead exactly where you need to go. I watched this happen with Marcus, a software engineer who'd been stuck in the same position for years despite his obvious talent. He started practicing awareness, anchoring and maintaining that awareness throughout his workday. Within 3 months, he'd been approached by 2 different companies offering positions he'd never even applied for. The opportunities were always there in the field. His previous thought-based broadcasting just wasn't aligned to receive them. The ancient Egyptians understood this perfectly. Their hieroglyphs show consciousness as a field that extends beyond the physical body, interacting with the cosmic order. What they depicted symbolically, we can now measure electromagnetically. Your homework for this week: practice the awareness, anchor twice daily, and catch yourself at least 5 times each day to notice you're aware of whatever you're doing. Don't try to change anything else yet. Just train your nervous system to recognize the difference between identifying with thought content and identifying with awareness itself. Because once you start broadcasting from awareness instead of thought patterns, you'll discover that reality has been waiting to respond to the real you all along. Here's something that's going to fundamentally shift how you understand your own mind. Most of the thoughts you experience throughout the day aren't actually generated by your individual brain. They're being accessed from collective thought fields that exist beyond your personal consciousness, like radio signals you're unconsciously tuning into and then mistaking as your own mental activity. Before you dismiss this as abstract philosophy, let's examine the evidence that's hiding in plain sight. Have you ever noticed how entire populations suddenly become obsessed with the same topics at the same time? How millions of people simultaneously develop identical fears about things they've never personally encountered? Or how cultural movements seem to emerge spontaneously across different regions with no direct communication between them? This isn't coincidence, it's collective consciousness in action. And there's measurable scientific evidence proving this phenomenon exists. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton has been running an extraordinary experiment for over 2 decades. They've placed random number generators machines that should produce completely unpredictable sequences at locations worldwide. Under normal circumstances, these machines generate truly random patterns with no correlation between devices. But something remarkable happens during major global events that capture mass attention. When significant events unfold, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, major celebrations, these supposedly random machines start showing non-random patterns simultaneously across the globe. The statistical probability of this occurring by chance is virtually zero. What's happening is that collective human focus is actually influencing probability fields at quantum levels. Mass consciousness is literally affecting physical reality through concentrated attention. This validates what Thoth taught about the collective unconscious functioning as a shared field of consciousness, containing thought patterns, belief systems, and emotional frequencies that individual minds access, like radio receivers tuning into different broadcast stations. Just as your radio doesn't generate the music it receives transmissions from distant sources, your brain often receives thoughts from collective fields rather than producing them internally. Here's how to verify this in your own experience. Right now, bring to mind your concerns from yesterday. How many of those thoughts were about situations you were directly experiencing through your five senses? Probably very few. Most were likely about economic conditions you read about online, political situations in distant locations, social problems affecting people you've never met, or global threats that don't impact your immediate environment. These thoughts didn't originate from your direct sensory experience or personal history. They entered your awareness from collective thought fields, mass consciousness streams focused on shared concerns, fears, and preoccupations, and you unconsciously adopted them as your personal thoughts. Think about this. You might spend significant mental energy worrying about inflation rates. But when did you personally experience inflation affecting your grocery bill? You might have strong opinions about celebrities you've never met, political figures you'll never encounter, or conflicts happening thousands of miles away. These aren't thoughts generated from your individual experience, they're collective field transmissions you're receiving and identifying with. The disturbing yet liberating truth is that you've been even less in control of your thinking than you realized after our previous electromagnetic broadcast discussion. But recognizing that you're accessing collective fields opens an incredible opportunity. You can choose which fields to tune into and which to tune out. This connects directly to what we discovered about your electromagnetic signature. Remember how your heart's electromagnetic field extends beyond your body and responds to your internal state? Well, collective thought fields operate on similar frequencies. When you engage with certain types of thoughts, you're literally tuning your personal electromagnetic field to match collective frequencies, broadcasting those thought patterns. Here's a practical investigation that will revolutionize your relationship with thinking. For the next 21 days, conduct what I call the thought origin investigation. Each evening, review your day's thoughts and categorize them into three distinct types. First, direct experience thoughts. These are responses to actual sensory input thoughts about the temperature of your coffee, reactions to conversations you had, responses to physical sensations, or immediate environmental conditions. Second, personal history thoughts. These emerge from your individual past memories, learned patterns, emotional responses based on your unique life experiences and conditioning. Third, collective field thoughts. These are absorbed from media consumption, cultural narratives, concerns about distant situations, opinions about people or events outside your direct experience, worries about global conditions that don't affect your immediate reality. Most people discover that collective field thoughts comprise 60 to 70% of their daily mental activity. This means the majority of what you consider your thinking is actually you unconsciously downloading and engaging with mass consciousness transmissions. The revolutionary choice becomes obvious. Stop engaging with type 3 thoughts entirely. When thoughts arise about situations you're not directly experiencing, let them pass without mental engagement. Don't feed them attention. Don't elaborate on them. Don't argue with them or try to solve them. Simply observe them as external transmissions and redirect your attention elsewhere. This single practice can reduce mental noise by more than half, dramatically clarifying your electromagnetic broadcast. Instead of transmitting a chaotic mixture of personal concerns and collective anxieties, you begin broadcasting a cleaner signal focused on your actual experience and genuine personal growth. Try this right now. Identify 3 thoughts you had today about situations completely outside your direct experience. Notice how engaging with these thoughts created emotional responses in your body, even though the situations don't actually affect your immediate reality. What's fascinating is how this connects to our earlier archaeological dig into recurring thought patterns. Many thoughts you assumed were personal conditioning are actually collective field patterns you've been accessing repeatedly. The anxiety about economic collapse, the fear of social judgment, the obsession with productivity. These aren't necessarily your individual programming. They're mass consciousness streams that millions of people are simultaneously tapping into. Once you stop engaging collective field thoughts, something profound happens. Your personal electromagnetic signature begins broadcasting more authentically. Reality starts responding to your genuine individual frequency rather than the mixed signals of personal concerns, combined with collective mental static. The implications extend far beyond personal peace of mind. Every time you choose not to engage with collective fear patterns, anxiety streams, or mass preoccupations, you're literally withdrawing your electromagnetic energy from those fields. You're no longer contributing to their power and influence over human consciousness. This is how individual awakening creates collective transformation. As more people recognize the difference between personal thoughts and collective field transmissions, the power of negative mass consciousness patterns begins diminishing. Each person who stops feeding collective anxiety with their attention weakens those fields for everyone. Starting tomorrow, begin your 21-day thought origin investigation. You'll be amazed at how much mental space opens up when you stop engaging with thoughts about situations outside your direct experience. The next question becomes, if you're not filling your consciousness with collective mental noise, what do you tune into instead? That's where our journey gets truly interesting, because conscious choice about which thought fields to access opens doorways to entirely different levels of reality. Here's what most people don't realize. Reality isn't this fixed, objective backdrop against which your life unfolds. It's actually a responsive field that shifts and reorganizes itself based on how you're observing it. And when you're identified with thoughts, you're observing reality through thought-based filters that literally determine what shows up in your experience. Think about quantum physics for a moment. At the subatomic level, we've proven that the act of observation actually changes the behavior of particles. The famous double-slit experiment shows that electrons behave differently when they're being observed versus when they're not. This isn't just some abstract laboratory curiosity, it's revealing something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. But here's where it gets really interesting. This principle doesn't stop at the quantum level. It scales up to your daily experience in ways that would blow your mind if you could see the full picture. When you're identified with a thought like, relationships are difficult, that thought becomes your observation lens. You're not consciously choosing to see relationships as difficult. You've become fused with that thought pattern. And now it's the filter through which you observe reality. And reality, being responsive to observation, organizes itself to match that filter. So what happens? You start noticing all the ways relationships are challenging. Your attention gets drawn to couples arguing, friends having drama, articles about divorce rates. You unconsciously gravitate toward relationship dynamics that confirm this belief. When your partner leaves dishes in the sink, you don't just see dishes, you see evidence that relationships require so much work. When they're quiet after a long day, you interpret it through the relationships are difficult filter and wonder what's wrong. But here's the crucial part. You're not consciously creating this experience. You're identified with a thought pattern that's observing reality through a specific lens, and reality is organizing around that observation. It's like wearing colored glasses and then concluding the world is that color. Now contrast this with what happens when you stop identifying with that thought. When relationships are difficult arises in your awareness, and you recognize it as just a thought, not truth, not authentic knowing, just a mental pattern. Something extraordinary shifts. You're no longer observing reality through that filter. The thought can still be present. It might arise regularly, but you're not believing it or broadcasting it as your operating frequency. You're observing from awareness itself, which has no predetermined filters about how relationships should be. Let me give you a concrete example that'll make this crystal clear. Take the thought, money is hard to make. When you're identified with this thought, it creates a very specific observation filter. You notice how much effort everything requires financially. You see opportunities that don't work out. You experience the struggle and pressure around money. Your attention gets drawn to stories about economic hardship, people working multiple jobs, the difficulty of getting ahead. But here's what's fascinating. You're not consciously choosing this experience. You've inherited this thought pattern, maybe from parents who struggled financially, maybe absorbed it from collective fields that we talked about earlier. But you've taken it on as truth about reality, and now it's the lens through which you observe financial possibilities. When you stop identifying with that thought, when you recognize it as possibly inherited programming rather than ultimate truth about how reality works, you're no longer locked into that observation filter. Different aspects of reality become visible. Opportunities that were always there but previously filtered out suddenly seem obvious. Synchronicities that you would have dismissed as coincidence start appearing meaningful. Actions that feel aligned and natural become apparent, whereas before, only struggle-requiring actions were visible to you. I had a friend who experienced this shift dramatically. She'd been identified with "I'm not good with money" for decades. Every financial decision felt overwhelming. She'd avoid looking at bank statements, felt anxious about investments, assumed she needed experts for everything money-related. Then she started recognizing this as just a thought pattern, not truth about her capabilities. She didn't try to replace it with positive thinking or affirmations. She simply stopped identifying with it as her identity. Within months, she was naturally drawn to learn about investments, found herself making intuitive financial decisions that worked out well, and discovered she actually had quite good instincts about money. They'd just been filtered out by her identification with that limiting thought. This isn't about positive thinking or replacing limiting thoughts with positive ones. That's still operating from thought identification, just with different thoughts. This is about dissolving identification with both limiting and positive thoughts and observing from awareness itself. When you observe from awareness, rather than through thought filters, you discover that reality is far more fluid, responsive, and possibility-filled than thoughts ever suggested. You start seeing that what you took to be fixed facts about how life works were actually just the results of observing reality through particular filters. Thoth understood this deeply. His wisdom points to reality as consciousness appearing as experience. When consciousness recognizes itself as awareness rather than thought, experience naturally shifts to reflect that recognition. It's not that you're manifesting or creating reality, it's that you're no longer distorting your perception of what's already available. The responsive field we talked about in earlier sections, that electromagnetic broadcasting system, operates very differently when you're not identified with thoughts. Instead of broadcasting the frequency of relationships are difficult or money is hard to make, you're broadcasting the frequency of open awareness. And reality responds to that openness with possibilities that thought identification simply couldn't perceive. Pay attention this week to one thought pattern you've been identified with. Notice how it filters what you see and experience. Then try recognizing it as just a thought, not truth, and observe what becomes visible that wasn't there before. The laboratory of your daily life is showing you constantly how non-identification changes what shows up. You just have to start paying attention to the experiment that's already running. After witnessing how reality responds differently when you stop identifying with thoughts, you inevitably face the most fundamental question of human existence. If you're not your thoughts, and thoughts have been your primary source of identity your entire life, then who exactly are you? This isn't some philosophical abstraction we're diving into here. This is the most practical question you'll ever encounter, because your sense of identity determines your frequency, and your frequency determines what shows up in your experience. When you really grasp this connection, everything changes. Look at how most people construct their identity. It's almost entirely thought-based. Someone says, "I'm a person who struggles with anxiety," and believes that thought so consistently, identifies with it so completely, that it becomes their sense of self. "I'm not good with money. I'm unlucky in relationships. I'm just not a morning person." These aren't truths about who you are. They're thought-based. End quote. Identity structures that you've mistaken for reality. Here's what's fascinating. These identity thoughts don't just describe your experience, they actively create it. When you identify as someone who struggles with anxiety, you're broadcasting the frequency of struggle and anxiety. Reality, being the responsive field we explored earlier, mirrors that frequency back to you through circumstances that confirm your identity. You get more situations to feel anxious about, more evidence that you're indeed someone who struggles with anxiety. The same pattern plays out with every thought-based identity structure. Identify as unlucky in love, and you'll magnetize experiences that prove that identity correct. Identify as bad with money, and financial challenges will show up to validate that belief. It's not punishment or some cosmic joke, it's simply how consciousness operates. Now, when you begin to see thoughts as temporary mental events rather than truth, these identity structures start dissolving. And initially, this feels destabilizing as hell. These thought-based identities, limiting as they were, provided a sense of who you are and how to navigate reality. Without them, there can be a temporary period of "who am I?" confusion. But what emerges in that space of not knowing is something far more authentic, powerful, and aligned with how consciousness actually works. The discovery that changes everything. Your true identity isn't any thought about who you are. It's awareness itself, the consciousness that can observe any thought, emotion, or experience without being defined by it. You are the space in which all experience occurs, not any particular experience within that space. Think about it. What's been constant throughout your entire life? Not your thoughts. They've changed millions of times. Not your emotions. They come and go like weather. Not your body. Every cell has been replaced multiple times. Not your circumstances, relationships, or roles. The one constant has been the aware presence that's witnessed it all. That witnessing awareness is what you actually are. This awareness-based identity broadcasts a completely different frequency than thought-based identity. Thought-based identity is constantly seeking, comparing, trying to maintain or improve itself through experience. It needs constant validation from reality to prove its existence and worth. This creates a desperate, needy frequency that actually repels the experiences you desire. Awareness-based identity doesn't need anything from reality because it recognizes itself as already complete. It's not trying to become anything because it knows itself as the unchanging space in which all becoming occurs. This creates a frequency of sufficiency, wholeness, inherent okayness that naturally magnetizes aligned experiences because it's no longer broadcasting lack or desperation. The shift from thought-based to awareness-based identity is probably the most profound transformation a human being can undergo. Here's a comprehensive 30-day protocol to facilitate this shift. Phase 1, days 1 to 7, identity, inventory. Spend this week becoming conscious of every "I am" statement you habitually think or say. Carry a small notebook and jot them down as you notice them. I am tired. I am stressed. I am someone who. Don't judge or try to change anything yet. Just become aware of how constantly you're defining yourself through thoughts. Phase 2, days 8 tot 14. Source, investigation. For each identity statement you've collected, ask, is this what I am, or is this a thought about what I am? Then practice rewriting from identity to observation. Instead of I am anxious, try I'm noticing anxious thoughts and sensations. Instead of I am broke, try I'm observing a current financial situation. This subtle shift begins loosening identification. Phase 3, days 15 to 21. Direct inquiry. Each morning, sit quietly and ask yourself, what am I if I'm not my thoughts? Don't try to answer with more thoughts. Drop into the direct experience of the aware presence that's asking the question. Notice that there's something here that's aware of thoughts, aware of the body, aware of emotions, but isn't any of those things. Rest in that awareness. Phase 4, days 22 bis 30. Embodied integration. Embodied integration. Embodied integration. Now comes the real work. Living from this awareness-based identity in daily life. When challenging situations arise, instead of reacting from old thought patterns, pause and respond from that spacious awareness you've been discovering. When someone asks who you are, notice the impulse to recite your story, and instead connect with the aware presence beneath all stories. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about recognizing what you've always been underneath all the mental commentary. Thoth taught that the awakened being knows themselves as the witness of all experience, not as any particular experience. This witness consciousness is what you are, and it's been here all along, patiently waiting for you to notice. The beautiful paradox is that when you stop trying to be someone specific, you become authentically yourself. When you stop needing reality to validate your worth, reality starts reflecting your inherent wholeness. When you recognize yourself as awareness itself, you discover you're not separate from the consciousness that's creating your entire experience. This identity shift isn't just personal transformation, it's the foundation for consciously participating in reality creation. Because when you know yourself as awareness rather than as your thoughts about yourself, You're operating from the same level of consciousness that's actually orchestrating your experience. You're no longer trying to manipulate reality from the level of effect. You're collaborating with it from the level of cause. When you actually shift from living as thoughts to living as awareness, something extraordinary happens across every area of your life. Not because you've changed the world, but because you've stopped filtering reality through the distortion of thought identification. And the difference is immediate and unmistakable. Let me show you what this looks like practically, because this isn't about becoming a better meditator or more spiritual person. This is about discovering that reality has been waiting your entire life to respond to who you actually are. In relationships, the transformation is profound. When you're identified with thoughts, every interaction becomes a complex dance of perception management. You're constantly monitoring how you're being received, adjusting your presentation, defending positions that feel like threats to your very existence. Arguments aren't just disagreements, they're existential battles where your worth feels under attack. But from awareness, identity, something completely different emerges. You show up present without needing anything from the other person. When conflict arises, you can observe the sensations in your body, the emotional patterns, the thought stories, without any of it defining who you are. The other person feels this immediately. They're no longer interacting with someone who needs their validation or fears their judgment. They're meeting pure awareness, expressing itself through human form. I've watched people's marriages completely transform within weeks of this recognition, not because they learned better communication techniques, but because they stopped bringing the desperate energy of thought identification into every conversation. When you're not defending a story about who you are, genuine connection happens naturally. In work and creativity, the shift is equally dramatic. Thought identification turns every project into proof of your value. Creative blocks feel like personal failures. Success becomes necessary for worth validation, making every task carry impossible weight. You're not just writing a report or solving a problem, you're proving you deserve to exist. From awareness, identity, work flows through you without defining you. You might spend the same 8 hours at the same desk, but the quality of attention is completely different. Creative blocks become interesting phenomena to observe rather than evidence of inadequacy. Success or failure land as experiences rather than identity statements. The work itself often improves dramatically because it's no longer filtered through the resistance of someone trying to prove something. One architect I know described it perfectly. I used to design buildings to prove I was a good architect. Now, buildings design themselves through me. His clients started commenting on a quality in his work they couldn't name, a coherence and flow that hadn't been there before. Your health responds immediately to this shift. Thought identification creates chronic stress because every sensation gets interpreted as meaning something about you. That tension in your chest becomes, I'm anxious. That fatigue becomes, I'm weak. Your nervous system stays activated, constantly defending against sensations that feel like threats to your identity. From awareness, identity, sensations can be present without meaning anything about who you are. Your chest can feel tight without that tightness being you. Your energy can be low without that being a statement about your worth. The nervous system relaxes because there's no identity under attack. Many people experience dramatic improvements in chronic conditions simply from this recognition. Even finances transform. When you're identified with thoughts, money becomes proof of value. Every expense feels like a judgment on your worth. Every financial decision carries the weight of identity validation. You're not just buying groceries, you're proving you're responsible, successful, worthy of abundance. From awareness, identity, money flows more naturally because it's not carrying the burden of proving anything about who you are. You make decisions from clarity rather than identity, fear. Opportunities appear that were invisible when filtered through thought pattern limitations. The consistent pattern across all these areas is this. Thought identification forces reality to constantly confirm or deny your story about yourself, creating resistance and limitation. Awareness identity allows reality to organize around coherent consciousness without thought pattern filtering. This is why some monks can meditate for decades in caves without transforming their external circumstances, while others experience profound reality shifts after weeks of practice. It's not about meditation hours, it's about whether you've actually shifted from thought identification to awareness recognition in lived experience. You can meditate for hours while still identified with thoughts just quieter, more spiritual thoughts about how peaceful you are. But moving through daily life from awareness, identity, even for 5 minutes at a time, broadcasts a completely different frequency that reality responds to immediately. Here's your daily integration practice. 20 minutes, combining everything we've explored. Spend 5 minutes simply recognizing awareness, the space in which thoughts appear. 5 minutes observing thoughts without identification, watching them arise and pass like weather patterns. 5 minutes observing sensations without making them mean anything about who you are. 5 minutes previewing your day from awareness rather than thought patterns, seeing how differently situations might unfold when you show up as consciousness rather than stories. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about recognizing what's already true. You are vast, creative, coherent consciousness, temporarily experiencing itself through human form. Every limitation you've experienced has been the result of mistaking temporary thought patterns for your actual identity. Everything shifts not gradually through years of practice, but immediately upon recognizing what's actually here. The question remaining isn't whether this is possible, you've already glimpsed it, or you wouldn't still be listening. The question is whether you'll continue living from limited thought pattern identity, or recognize yourself as unlimited awareness that thoughts appear within. Reality has been waiting your entire life to respond to this recognition. Not the reality your thoughts tell you about, but the living, responsive field of consciousness that rearranges itself around the quality of awareness you're observing from. This is Thoth's ultimate teaching, and it's yours to verify. You are not your thoughts. You never have been. And the moment this stops being a concept and becomes lived recognition, everything changes. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood."